The sun dipped low over the sprawling acres of John's farm, casting long shadows across the fields of golden wheat and wildflowers. For years, John had poured his heart and soul into this land, his sanctuary away from the noise of the city, a place where the rhythms of nature dictated the day. Here, the only interruptions were the gentle rustle of the wind and the distant calls of birds. But that fragile peace shattered the day Karen moved in next door. From the moment her moving truck rumbled down the dirt road, John felt a prickle of unease. Karen wasn't like the other neighbors, quiet and respectful of boundaries. No, she seemed different. Loud laughter, music blasting from her speakers, and a constant stream of unfamiliar faces arriving and leaving her house like it was the town's new social hub. John first noticed Karen's disregard for his no trespassing signs when he found her standing just inside the edge of his property, inspecting the fence line with a smirk. "That's private land," he'd said firmly, stepping out onto his porch. She'd just shrugged, saying, "I was just looking." But it wasn't the first time she crossed the invisible line John had carefully marked. Despite his polite warnings, Karen's visits to his property became more frequent and more brazen. One evening, as John was closing the barn, he spotted Karen hanging string lights around a fire pit she'd built just over the property line, right at the edge of his farm. His stomach tightened. The land was dry from months without rain, and a fire here could be catastrophic. John walked over, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Karen, you can't light a fire here," he warned, voice steady but firm. She flashed a defiant smile. "Relax, John. It's just a little bonfire for some friends. Nothing to worry about." John shook his head. "It's on my land, and it's dangerous." Karen's smile faded, replaced by an irritated glare. "Look, I don't need a lecture. This land is just trees and grass. I'm not hurting anything." John's heart pounded. "If the fire gets out of control, it could burn everything. Your house, mine, the whole neighborhood." Karen rolled her eyes and waved a dismissive hand. "You're overreacting." John wanted to press the point, but Karen was already gathering her friends. Loud music started pumping, and the fire crackled to life, flames licking the night air. As John watched, from his porch, unease gnawed at him. The wind was picking up, stirring dry leaves and dead grass. He knew that a single spark here could spiral into disaster. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from a neighbor. "Did you see Karen's fire?" "It looks huge." John's jaw clenched. He grabbed his flashlight and headed toward the edge of his property, determined to put out the fire before it spread. But as he approached, Karen stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "This is private property now," she said, her tone sharp. "You don't get to tell me what to do." John's voice rose. "Karen, this fire is illegal and reckless. I'm calling the fire department if you don't put it out." Karen laughed. "Go ahead. Let's see what they say." The flames danced, higher, reflecting in her eyes. John noticed the pile of materials she'd gathered, scraps of wood, old furniture, and something wrapped in a tarp. What was she burning in that fire? Before he could ask, Karen's friends urged her to keep the fire going. The music blared louder, and the crowd cheered. John's heart raced. He backed away, already dialing the emergency number. He knew the fire could turn his peaceful farm into ashes before dawn. But even as the call connected, a cold realization settled over him. This wasn't just about a bonfire anymore. Something deeper and darker lurked beneath Karen's reckless smile. And it was only just beginning. The fire's orange glow carved flickering shadows into the night, swallowing the edge of John's farm in a dangerous blaze. The crackling grew louder, sharper, and more menacing as the flames hungrily consumed the woodpile Karen had gathered. John's phone pressed tightly against his ear as he pleaded with the fire dispatcher, trying to convey the urgency of the situation. But, with every passing minute, The wind twisted and shifted, carrying sparks and embers like tiny firebombs into the dry grass. The fire wasn't just a small bonfire anymore. It had become something wild and unpredictable. John's eyes were fixed on the flames, heart pounding with fear and frustration. Karen stood nearby, arms crossed and watching with a disturbingly calm expression. Her friends laughed, oblivious to the threat they were unleashing. When John shouted at Karen to help, she turned away, disappearing into the crowd. As the dispatcher promised to send help, John's gaze caught something strange. The tarp she'd set on fire wasn't just old cloth. It moved, a flicker of something unnatural, before curling into the flames. A pungent chemical smell rolled through the air, sharp and acrid. John's stomach twisted. "What's she burning?" he muttered under his breath. Karen's bonfire was illegal on multiple levels. No permits, no safety measures, and burning unknown materials right next to a dry field. The law was clear, but the danger felt immediate and personal. John felt powerless watching the fire spread closer to his fences, his crops, the animals he'd raised with care. Suddenly, a loud pop echoed. The fire surged violently, throwing a spray of sparks into the night sky. Someone screamed nearby. The crowd began to scatter, sensing the danger. John's pulse hammered in his ears as he sprinted toward the edge of the fire line, flashlight cutting through the smoky haze. The heat was intense, and the fire was moving faster than he could keep up. It was a wall of orange light swallowing everything in its path. From the corner of his eye, John caught movement, Karen rushing away from the flames toward the back of her property, ignoring the chaos she'd created. The fire wasn't just a reckless party stunt anymore. It was out of control. John grabbed a nearby garden hose and sprayed at the perimeter of the fire, but the dry grass was too thirsty for water, and the fire seemed to mock his efforts, leaping over the dampened areas with alarming ease. The fire department's sirens finally wailed in the distance, a thin hope cutting through the panic. As firefighters rushed in, John's mind raced. The fire wasn't just about Karen's irresponsibility. It was about what she had burned and why. The chemical smell lingered, and he noticed the ash falling in unusual black chunks, unlike the soft gray residue of normal wood. A sudden gust pushed the flames toward the barn. John shouted warnings, pulling his phone out to capture video evidence. This was more than a bonfire gone wrong. It was a potential disaster with unknown causes and consequences. Later, as the fire crews doused the last flickers, John stood apart. From the crowd, eyes scanning the smoky wreckage. Karen was nowhere to be found. Rumors buzzed like angry bees, whispers of illegal dumping, stolen property, or worse. The community was shaken. Half the farm lay blackened, with scorched earth and charred remnants where crops once grew tall and strong. The air still carried that strange chemical bite, haunting John's senses. Neighbors gathered in uneasy clusters, their voices low and urgent. No one had seen Karen since the fire. Her absence only deepened the mystery and suspicion. John felt the weight of the loss settle in his chest, heavier than the smoke still rising from his land. The fire had done more than burn his crops. It had ignited a dangerous secret. And John knew with a cold certainty that the worst was yet to come. John stood at the edge of the charred field, the blackened earth cracked and smoldering beneath his boots. The fire's fury had destroyed nearly half of his farm. Wheat stalks turned to ash, fences warped and melted, the familiar landscape forever altered. His heart ached as he surveyed the devastation, but his mind raced even faster. How had Karen's bonfire become a raging inferno so quickly? And why had she vanished into thin air the moment things spiraled out of control? That night, as embers still glowed faintly beneath the ruined soil, John received a call from a neighbor. The voice on the other end was shaky, breathless. "John, I think I saw Karen leaving the scene before the fire got bad. She wasn't alone." "Who was with her?" John asked, gripping the phone tighter. I'm not sure, but they looked hurried, like they were trying to hide something. A chill ran down John's spine. Karen's sudden disappearance wasn't just suspicious. It felt like she was running from more than just the fire. Determined to find answers, John walked the perimeter of the burnt land, searching for clues in the ash and debris. That's when he noticed it. Footprints. Two sets, one large and heavy, the other smaller and lighter, led away from the fire's edge, disappearing into the nearby woods. John's pulse quickened. This wasn't just carelessness or a reckless party gone wrong. Something darker was unfolding, right here on his farm. The next morning, the town buzzed with news of the fire. The local paper ran a headline: "Bonfire blaze ravages farm, neighbor disappears." Neighbors whispered in hushed tones, and a few cast wary glances toward Karen's empty house. John sat at his kitchen table, staring at the charred remnants of his land through the window. The smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air, a bitter reminder of the destruction. The phone rang. It was the HOA president, Linda. "We need to talk," she said firmly. "This fire has stirred up a lot of questions, and the community is demanding answers. Have you found anything?" John hesitated but decided to tell her about the footprints and Karen's suspicious departure. Linda's voice grew grim. "I'm organizing a meeting tonight. We need to get to the bottom of this, for everyone's safety." Later that evening, the meeting hall filled quickly. Faces John recognized but hadn't seen in weeks crowded the room, their eyes fixed on the empty chair where Karen should have been. Voices rose in frustration and fear. Some neighbors blamed Karen outright, calling her irresponsible and dangerous. Others whispered of past incidents, strange noises, late-night visitors, and mysterious fires nearby. Then Linda shared what she had uncovered. Karen had a history of ignoring HOA rules and warnings. More alarmingly, there were rumors of her involvement in illegal dumping and even theft from other properties. John's stomach turned. What was Karen really up to, and why had she risked so much by lighting that fire? The meeting took a sudden turn when a neighbor named Mike stepped forward with something unexpected, a small handheld camera he'd set up on his property. He played footage captured on the night of the fire. The video showed Karen and a shadowy figure unloading crates near the bonfire. As the fire grew, the figure handed Karen a heavy bundle wrapped in tarp, the very thing John had seen burn. John watched, heart pounding, as the camera revealed Karen's face, calm, calculating, even as flames roared dangerously close. The room fell silent, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from outside. Everyone rushed to the windows to see smoke rising from the far edge of John's property. Another small fire had ignited. Panic surged through the crowd. The fire was spreading again, and this time no one knew if it was an accident or something more sinister. John grabbed his coat and raced toward the smoke, thoughts swirling. Was Karen behind this second fire, or was someone else trying to finish what the first blaze started? The farm was no longer just his refuge. It was a battleground. And John realized that the nightmare had only just begun. The first rays of dawn crept over John's battered farm, casting a pale light on a landscape, transformed beyond recognition. Half of his land was charred and lifeless, the crops that once swayed gently in the breeze reduced to brittle black stalks. The air still smelled faintly of smoke, a constant reminder of the night's terror. John walked slowly through the wreckage, each step sinking into ash and debris. His eyes scanned the ruined fields, searching for anything salvageable, anything to cling to amid the destruction. But what caught his attention wasn't the damage. It was the strange footprints he spotted near the fire's edge. Unlike the deep-booted prints he'd seen the night before, these were smaller, lighter, and oddly arranged. They led away from the farm toward the dense woods at the property's boundary, disappearing beneath the thick underbrush. John crouched down, brushing ash aside. Something about these prints felt off. Too deliberate, too cautious. As if someone had been trying not to be seen. The realization sent a cold shiver down his spine. Karen's bonfire had been reckless. Yes, but it was also a smokescreen. And now John had a sinking feeling that there was more to this fire than anyone suspected. He returned to the house, where a restless energy buzzed through the neighborhood. Word of the fire had spread fast, and neighbors gathered in hushed groups, exchanging theories and rumors. Some spoke of Karen's sudden disappearance with unease. Others speculated about what she might have been hiding. John's phone rang. It was Linda, the HOA president. "We need to meet again," she said urgently. "There are too many unanswered questions, and I'm worried this isn't over." John agreed, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Something about the fire, the footprints, Karen's behavior. It all pointed to a hidden truth lurking just beneath the surface. Later that day, John decided to investigate the woods where the mysterious prints vanished. The forest was thick and shadowy, branches clawing at his jacket as he pushed forward. The deeper he went, the more uneasy he felt, as if unseen eyes were watching. Suddenly, he stumbled upon a clearing. There, half buried beneath leaves and dirt, lay the charred remains of a wooden crate, one that matched the shape of the bundle Karen had carried to the fire. John's heart pounded. He knelt and uncovered more, pieces of what looked like burned documents, twisted metal scraps, and something wrapped tightly in oilcloth. As he carefully pulled the bundle free, a sudden noise startled him, a twig snapping somewhere behind the trees. John spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the dusk. But there was no one there. He forced himself to focus, pulling the oilcloth open. Inside were papers, singed but legible. Farm records, strange receipts, and something that looked like a ledger with names and numbers. John's eyes widened. This wasn't just trash or old paperwork. This was evidence, proof of something illegal, maybe even criminal. His mind reeled. Could Karen have been burning stolen property, or was she covering up something even worse? As he pocketed the papers, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was anonymous. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." John swallowed hard. The fire had destroyed half his farm, but now it was clear. The damage was just the beginning. Someone didn't want him to uncover the truth, and that someone was watching. The night closed in around him like a dark veil, but John refused to back down. His farm, his livelihood, and his peace of mind were on the line. As he turned to leave the clearing, a shadow moved just beyond the tree line. A pair of eyes glinted in the darkness. John's blood ran cold. The community hall was packed to the brim, the air thick with unease and whispered accusations. John stood at the front, clutching the bundle of scorched documents tightly in his hands. Around him, neighbors' faces were a mixture of fear, anger, and curiosity. The silence was suffocating. Linda, the HOA president, cleared her throat and called the meeting to order. "We're here because half of John's farm was destroyed by a fire that many of us believe was deliberately set," she began. "We owe it to ourselves and to our safety to find out exactly what happened." John stepped forward. "I found something," he said, his voice steady but heavy with urgency. He laid the burnt papers on the table. "These were in the woods near the fire, documents Karen tried to destroy. They show evidence of illegal dumping, stolen goods, and something else, financial transactions that don't add up." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Before anyone could respond, Mike, the neighbor with the handheld camera, played the footage from the night of the fire. Karen appeared calm, almost cold, as she and a shadowy figure unloaded crates by the bonfire. The camera caught the figure handing her a heavy bundle, likely the documents John found. A hush fell over the room. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the back. That's not all. Everyone turned as Sarah, another neighbor, stepped forward holding her phone. I recorded something else, something Karen tried to hide. She played a video from earlier that week, Karen arguing with a man outside her house. The conversation was heated, voices raised, threats exchanged. John's stomach twisted. Who was that man? And what did he want from Karen? The tension escalated as neighbors began shouting over each other, accusations flying like sparks. From afar, some demanded Karen be held accountable. Others cautioned patience, warning against jumping to conclusions without all the facts. Amid the chaos, John noticed a few neighbors exchanging worried glances. Those who had previously defended Karen now seemed uneasy. Then Linda raised her hand, demanding silence. We're calling the police and the fire department to investigate this thoroughly. But until then, we ask for calm and cooperation. John nodded, but inside, a storm was brewing. Karen's lies were unraveling, but the truth was still buried somewhere deeper. As the meeting broke up, John's phone buzzed. It was an anonymous text. Stop digging or face the consequences. His hands trembled. Whoever was behind this was watching him, and willing to do whatever it took to keep secrets buried. Determined, John walked outside into the cool night air. The fire's glow still haunted the horizon, a reminder of the destruction and betrayal. Suddenly, headlights swept across the parking lot, and a sleek black car pulled up. The window rolled down, revealing the shadowy figure from the video, the man who'd met with Karen. John, the man said smoothly, stepping out. You don't know what you're getting into. John squared his shoulders. I want the truth, and I'm not stopping. The man's lips curled into a sinister smile. You should be careful. Some fires burn hotter when you try to put them out. Before John could respond, the man slipped back into his car and sped away, leaving a trail of dust and unanswered questions. John watched the taillights fade, realizing this was no longer just about a bonfire or a farm. It was a battle against something much bigger and far more dangerous, and he was right in the middle of it. The black car disappeared into the night, leaving John alone under the starry sky. The man's warning echoed in his mind like a cold chill. But John's resolve only hardened. He wouldn't let fear stop him from uncovering the truth. The next morning, John returned to the scorched fields, his eyes scanning every inch of the ruined earth. The farm was a ghost of its former self, but John knew the fire wasn't the only damage. Something beneath the soil was hidden, something Karen had desperately tried to keep secret. He grabbed a shovel from the shed and began digging near the spot where the strange footprints had disappeared into the woods. The earth was hard and dry, but John's determination broke through the surface. After a few minutes, the shovel hit something solid. His breath caught as he cleared away the dirt to reveal a large rusted metal box, half buried in the earth. John's hands trembled as he pried it open. Inside lay stacks of papers, old ledgers, and several small plastic bags filled with an unknown, white powder. His heart pounded. What was this? Evidence of illegal activity, drugs, toxic chemicals? John carefully collected the documents and bags, stuffing them into a bag for safekeeping. He knew he needed expert help. Without hesitation, he called the local sheriff's office. Detectives arrived within the hour, their faces grim as they examined the scene. They took the evidence and began questioning John about Karen, the fire, and the suspicious activity on the property. As the investigation unfolded, John learned disturbing details. Karen had been involved in a covert operation, using her property, and now his, as a dumping ground for hazardous waste and possibly narcotics. The bonfire wasn't just reckless, it was an attempt to destroy evidence. The community was shaken. Rumors flew faster than the wildfire, and many wondered how long Karen had been hiding her secrets. John felt a mixture of anger and betrayal. His farm wasn't just a victim of the fire, it was a crime scene. That night, John sat on his porch, staring into the darkness. The peaceful life he had built was gone, replaced by suspicion and danger. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You're digging too deep. Last chance. Walk away." John's fingers hovered over the screen. He knew backing down wasn't an option. The battle for his land, and the truth, was far from over. John couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching him, lurking just beyond the edge of the trees or in the quiet corners of his home. The anonymous threats had escalated from cryptic messages to ominous signs. Tires tracks appeared on his property overnight, and strange noises echoed through the farm in the dead of night. Every step John took seemed to pull him deeper into a dangerous game where trust was scarce and betrayal hid behind familiar faces. One evening, as John worked late into the night trying to salvage what he could from the ruined fields, headlights flashed in the distance. A car slowly rolled down the long driveway and stopped near his barn. He tensed, instinctively reaching for the phone. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a woman John hadn't expected to see. Linda, the HOA president. "What are you doing here this late?" John asked, suspicion heavy in his voice. Linda's eyes darted nervously. "I had to talk." "To you? Things are worse than we thought." John motioned her inside the farmhouse. Over cups of strong coffee, Linda revealed new information. Karen wasn't working alone. The illegal dumping and other suspicious activities connected to the fire were part of a larger network, possibly a criminal ring using the quiet farm. Community as a front. "There are people in the HOA who might be involved," Linda admitted quietly. "Some have been protecting Karen or turning a blind eye." John's blood ran cold. The people he trusted might be the very ones threatening his farm and his safety. Before he could respond, a loud bang echoed from the barn. John and Linda rushed outside, only to find the barn door hanging off its hinges. Inside, the equipment was scattered, and the floor bore deep tire marks. Someone had been here, searching. John's heart pounded. Whoever did this was sending a clear message. Stop. Now or face worse. Determined not to back down, John decided to bring in a private investigator. He needed someone who could dig without fear, someone outside the community's tangled web. That night, as John sat alone on the porch, he heard footsteps approaching. He grabbed a flashlight, shining it toward the shadows. A figure stepped into the light. A man in a dark hoodie. "Looking for me, John?" the man said with a cruel smile. Before John could react, the man lunged forward and everything went black. John's world spiraled into darkness as the man's hands closed around him, dragging him into the shadows. Panic surged through his veins, but he forced himself to stay calm. Years of hard work had taught him resilience, and he wasn't about to give up now. With a sudden burst of strength, John broke free and stumbled backward. The flashlight beam danced wildly across the yard, catching the attacker's face just before he vanished into the night. John's breath came in ragged gasps. His phone was missing, torn from his pocket during the scuffle. He was alone, vulnerable, and running out of options. But John refused to be silenced. The next morning, bruised but unbroken, John met with the private investigator he had hired. Maggie, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for uncovering buried secrets. Together, they pored over the documents recovered from the hidden metal box. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Karen's operation was far larger than anyone imagined. She had been part of a criminal ring trafficking illegal chemicals and stolen goods, using the remote farmland to cover their tracks. The fire had been a desperate attempt to erase evidence before authorities caught on. Even more shocking was who was involved. Some HOA members had been complicit, turning a blind eye or actively helping conceal the crimes. Linda had been right to warn John. Armed with this knowledge, John and Maggie worked closely with the sheriff's office, setting up a sting operation to expose the criminals. They gathered evidence quietly, building a case that would shake the community to its core. Meanwhile, Karen remained missing, her disappearance deepening the mystery. But John knew that sooner or later she would be found. Then came the day when the criminals struck back, sending threatening letters to John's family, vandalizing his property, trying to intimidate him into silence. John stood firm, drawing strength from the support of neighbors who had grown to believe him. The community that once whispered behind closed doors began to rally, demanding justice and accountability. Finally, the day of the raid arrived. Sheriff deputies, led by John, and Maggie moved in at dawn to arrest Karen's accomplices and search properties linked to the illegal activities. The operation was a success, and dozens of arrests sent shockwaves through the town. John watched as the criminals were led away in handcuffs, knowing that his farm and his life would never be the same. The scars of the fire and the betrayal ran deep, but they also sparked a newfound sense of unity among neighbors. In the weeks that followed, the land began to heal. New crops were planted, fences rebuilt, and the blackened fields slowly turned green again. One afternoon, as John stood on his porch watching the sunset, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. Karen, handcuffed and surrounded by law enforcement. She looked tired, defeated, but her eyes locked with John's. There was no remorse, only cold defiance. John felt a strange sense of closure. The nightmare was over, but the lesson remained clear. Trust is fragile, and sometimes the greatest battles are fought not against fire, but against the shadows within a community. As the sun dipped below the hills, John breathed deeply, ready to rebuild not just his farm, but the bonds broken by greed and deceit. Because in the end, truth was the strongest flame of all.